All right, so what I want to do for this video is tell you guys about user validation and how we can create a better validation system. So validation is something that we need to do before we perform some database intrinsic operations. So for example, you want to update the name of the user in a record somewhere, and the name of the user is a string, and what but what happens is while the user is trying to add something like that. So I have this example for a user creation API. The first name here is supposed to be a string, but if it's not ensured, and I'll start up my server. But if it's not ensured, imagine this is the final data that I'll end up sending to my backend. I don't want to do that. I want to ensure that every one of these things is a string. One way to definitely do this is by manually ensuring that I'm writing the right thing. But I think one thing about being human is we make errors. That's why we write programs so that we don't end up writing errors. So again, I'm in the root of my application. I have this user router, and inside these user routers, I have these five routes. I'm going to pick this one, post for user creation, and I'm going to go into the controller for this user creation API. And this is my function right now. I'm destructuring first name, last name, email, and user time from request.body, making it as an object and returning that object as is. Now in between, I want to only execute everything below once I am sure that the data is correct. So let's correct that data. I'm going to make three variables: errors, which is an object, an empty object; error message, which is an empty string; is form valid. Uh, I might call this is data valid, or maybe is body valid. Might be a right one. By default, it's true because I haven't started validating it. So let's just validate our first. Uh, let's start validating with this first name. I'm going to see if this request.body.firstname is exists, and the type of request. If I've destructured, I don't think I have to do this anymore. Uh, is equal to string, and also I don't want this to be empty as well. So first name dot trim dot length should not be equal to 0, and if it's any of that, what I want to do is errors, and whatever the key name is, I'll just type in first name, and I'll say uh, this should be a string and not empty. And then I'm also going to do one thing. I'm going to say is body valid. I'm going to set this to false, and then I'm going to do if um, the body is not valid, I'm going to say return response status 400 dot json. I'm going to say success is equal to is body valid. Error message is equal to kindly correct the errors. Uh, and then I'm going to return errors as is. Let's see if this works. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to try it like this. What happens? Huh. Sorry. Okay. So instead of having a lot of, this should be an or. If any of this is true, I want it to be invalidated. Let's start again. All right, so I've just got an error that 400 bad request. So 400 status code is hit when the user tries to interact with the API, but does not send the API the correct information that it needs. So 400 means that our API is working correctly, but the user is sending invalid data to our API that it does not confirm with. All right, so error dot first name. I want to tell the user that success false error message, and in errors, the first name that is required, it just said this should be a string and not empty. Let's do it the same for last name. Last name, and then we have email. Let's do this for email as well. Just copy pasting and then changing the name, and then we have this user type. Let's talk about user type in a bit. Okay, let's see if this works. And I'm going to just say run one Adil is equal to empty string again. All right, it says last name dot trim is not a function. Last name dot trim dot length type of, and let's just remove this for now. And what I can do here is else, you know, if it is an if uh, first name dot trim dot length is equal to 0. This should be a string. Let's just make this more fancy. Um, all right. Um, and I'll do the same for last name as well. You can see that how is just getting more complicated and complicated. And then I'll do the same here as well. And then I'll say last name, last name, and it says unexpected token on line number 21. If so we don't need this, we don't need this, and don't need this. Let's see if this works. Um, last name dot trim. This should be a string. Um, type of last name. So this is why it's causing an error. Let's just reset this if I've confused you guys. Is not equal to a string. And the same I'll do for last name. Let's see if this works. All right, they work. And I'll do the same for email as well. You can see how complicated this gets. Imagine if your API accepts 20 parameters. I have to like validate each and every one of them. It's just, this is just hard. Um, all right, so what we're doing here is if the first name is, if it's undefined, if it's not given, or if it's not a string, or if the length is 0, I want the body valid to be false, and then errors, first name as the key, and then the message for it, and then I do the same for last name as well, and then for email as well. And now if I run this, it's telling me first name should be a string and not empty. Okay, I'll say okay, I understand that. I'll type in my name, I'll hit enter. It says first name should be a string and not empty. It's not a string. Length is equal to, oh, sorry. See, so many errors. Okay. So it's saying for the last name, this should be a string and not empty. Okay, I'll just type in Imran. All right, for email saying the string cannot be empty. I'm not going to validate email here. Um, now I'm just going to give you an. I just wanted to give you an example. This should be an okay. Uh, are we validating the email? Email, uh, and if it is equal to 0. So if the email is undefined, or if it's not a string, or if the length is equal to 0, I want my body to be false, the body validation to be false, and errors with the email key and then the message for it, I want it to be returned like that. All right, so it went through all of those checks and decided that we don't have an error. So that is why it was able to process below here. One thing that I didn't check here was the user type. Let's just go ahead and do that as well. Uh, so user type, user type. All right. So if the user type is undefined, if the end user forgets to send user type in the API key, if that's the case, or if it's not a string, or if the length is 0, I want to return an error. So I'm going to say this should be a string and it should not be empty. Let's see if that's the case. And if it's empty, do I get an error? Yes, I get an error. Now, once these checks are done, I also want to ensure that the user type needs to be an enum. So either the user type value should be user or admin. I want to ensure that as well. So what I will do here is once these checks are done and no error comes here, I'll ensure that um, so I'll set some enums here manually. I'll say cons checks. I'll call them checks. I'll say either can be a user, either can be an admin, or either can be someone with a support type. And then I'm just going to go ahead and say checks dot sum and item like check. I'll just say check, and check is equal to I'll say user type. And I'll actually do this. I'll say found, and then I'll say if not found, I want the same errors, unexpected token. God, I hate when this happens. Um, all right, all right, I hear you. I just want to ensure that where my error is. It's on line number 49. Oh, okay. Do I still have that error? No, I don't have that error. And all right, so uh, checks is an array. Sum is a method on array which I will attach into the video description. What this does is it checks. through the entire array, and if one condition, like from all of the array items, if only one condition is true, if one of those items will match whatever the user sends in. If one of them is true, it's going to return me a boolean, a true. If none of them match, it's going to return me false. So I'm just checking if the user type is from one of these user. If it's not, this is return me false, and if it's false, I'll return an error that this should be a string and can have these values. I'm just going to add a plus here, and I'm going to say checks dot split, and this should be it. Let's see if this works. Uh, checks dot split is sorry. Checks dot join split is when you do the opposite. So checks dot join. All right. So it's saying me that first of all, I'll do something like this. Okay, it's telling me that this should be a string and not empty. Okay. Super. Or I'll just type in admin, I'll just type in admin like this. Okay, it's saying that this should be a string and can have only these values: user, admin, and support. I'll just type in user, and I see an error here. I'll just add a spacer, and let's see. Okay, so it says it should be a user. All right, so now I've ended up validating all of these values: first name, last name, email, user type. And if a user type is an enum, if it does something else like that, it's just going to throw me an error with a 400, so that the end user knows what is it that I'm doing wrong here. Now, as you can see, this can become like very cumbersome very quickly. All I did was I validated these four fields: first name, last name, email, and user type. And I'm sure if some of you who might be viewing this might be thinking, oh well, he could have done something smart. He could have just made a function out of it and then started using that function. But again, it's we what I'm trying to do here is I want to ensure that my users or my API behavior has a very consistent behavior, and obviously I can like wrap a function around them and do something like that. The only reason I showed you this is just to show you that this is how like validation is done normally, even the libraries you're using or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment all of this. I'm going to stop my server. I'm going to come up in my server and I'm going to say, so just for this tutorial, I wrote a new express validation library. It's called make validations, and I'll just so it's under the organization with void, and I'm going to say make validations dash dash safe make validation. Sorry, and in the meantime this installs. I'll have this opened. I just wrote this today because I had nothing else to do in my life, and we'll see an example of it. So this is the basic syntax of it. We have this make validation method. It has a type. We provided some payload like that request.body, and then we just have some text. So the first name should be a string, last name should be a string, email should be a string, and but it should not be empty. Then we have this option 6, and it should be a string and it can be empty, so something like that. I'm just going to copy this for now, and instead of all of this code I'm going to add this, and I'm going to go at the top. I'm going to say const make validation is equal to require, and then I'm going to say with void make validations. That's just plain JavaScript, guys. If you have like any further ideas about this, just share a just reach out to me on Twitter or make an issue on the GitHub profile for this repository, and I'll try to like fix it as soon as possible. So first name, email, last name, email, and then what do we have? Okay, then we have email, and no, this cannot be empty. And I want to ensure that the same goes for all of these values, right? And also, by the way, currently the types that I have are the following. I can validate an array, an enum, a string. I'll probably add a number, an array of objects and stuff like that in the future. But just for the sake of it, I just wanted to have these things. So I have an email, a last name, and then I have user type. Oh, this is where the fun begins. User type, and types is enum. And in my options, I'll add something like an enum, and I'll say admin. It can be just user, it can be support. And once I've done that, this will basically return me a success boolean, a message string, and an errors object. So result is basically an object, right? So what I'll do is if result dot success is false, all I'm going to do is return response dot status 400, user did something bad. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to spread that entire object, whatever I'm getting from this API. And now let's see, uh, let's let's run our server again and see what happens now. So I have the same values and says possible values are admin, user, support. All right, I'll make this empty just to see. Okay, last name cannot be empty. All right, awesome. So what I ended up doing was I ended up replacing all of this code. So somewhere around here, and this is all I ended up replacing it with. And it's pretty straightforward. So I have this method called make validation. It has a callback method called types. Types has three possible values at the moment. I'll probably add a couple more in the future. A string, an enum, or an array. Then what I have to do is I just have to return an object with a payload, which is request.body. So everything that the user is sending me from the API request. And then I have my own checks for those things. So I'm checking first name. The type for that first name needs to be a string, and the options for that are it cannot be empty. So this is like the one rule. Same goes for last name. Same goes for email. User type, on the other hand, is an enum. So that means that user type can have a possible one value from a possible range of values, which I have done here. Like user type types is equal to enum and option is equal to enum, and those types are separated by a space. Another thing that I can do here is I can just put this on a separate line. So so there are two ways of setting up an enum. You can also set this up as an object because, and I can just say admin, super admin, I don't know, user, support, and I'll just name these things, or just have them have separate keys. And once then if it was already restarted, but then if I come here and I say stuff like this, it's going to give me an error. It's going to say possible values are admin, super admin, user, support. So you can either have it as an array of strings separated by space or an object, which is, I think it's like pretty cool. So let's just go and walk through the library. You can simply install it by using this command. Uh, you can validate a string. So there are like different options. Validate a string in enum type, an array, and then I have an express.js example. Feel free to go for it. I'll attach the link to this repository along with the npm packages link. The reason I'm talking about this because I'll be using this make validation library in my chat application with sockets. Uh, and I just wanted to give a overview and walkthrough as to what it does. All right, so strings option I already talked about. For and then we have enums. So imagine I have these I have this payload. This is what the user is sending me from the API endpoint. Type 1 eagle, type 2 admin, type 3 elephant, type 4 is a user. Either I can validate it like this, one that I talked about, valid enum options with spaces, or I can do it with this. The reason I've just repeated this is because I wanted to, if you run this, it's probably going to give success on some of those cases and false in some of those cases, just to show a picture as to what it does. And then we have array. So arrays are a bit different. It's the same. The syntax is pretty much the same. Whatever the user sends, we just say payload request.body, and then for example, we can have we can have a check which is like types.array, and then options are that can it be empty or not, can it be unique or not, can it be empty, it should not be empty, it should be unique, and it should only be strings. So we can combine all of those options and have an array validation. And for each type that we have, either it's a string, an array, an enum, we have all the possible options that we can add them. I'll probably add a couple more in the future as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I think it definitely reduces a lot of code, a lot of things that you had to do manually before. And the best thing about this is you have this one method, this one generic method, and it returns a very consistent user error response to the end user, which is if you're a front end developer and you're working with some back end developers, it's like it's such a peaceful thing when you get a consistent API response without things breaking, and even if they're breaking, you get an error response like this, which is super nice. So yeah, that was pretty much it for this tutorial. To sum it up, we talked about why we need validations. We wrote a custom validation method. I'll also like just upload this entire repository on GitHub so that you can just view this code as is. And then we just commented everything out and used a library which is called make validation. And I personally think that this reduces a lot of code and handles things very elegantly. But if I would really love to hear your feedback on this as well if you think this is super complicated. And yeah, this is pretty much it. Have a good day. Bye, guys.